In the previous videos, we distinguished between nominal and real GDP. Nominal GDP measures the value of production using current year prices, while real GDP measures the value of production after removing the effect of price changes. So how do economists measure the change in prices across everything produced in an economy? One answer is the GDP deflator, which is a price index that measures changes in the prices of domestically produced final output. It allows us to separate changes in the money value of GDP into changes caused by higher real output or changes caused by higher prices. Suppose the nominal GDP has increased from 500 billion pounds to 550. At first glance, it appears that the economy has grown by 10%. However, nominal GDP can increase for two different reasons. The economy may have produced more output. Alternatively, the same amount of output may simply have been sold at higher prices, or it could be a combination of both. So increase in nominal GDP may reflect higher output or higher prices or both. So nominal GDP alone cannot tell us how much actual production has increased. Well, GDP deflator helps us isolate the price changes. The formula for GDP deflator is simply nominal GDP divided by real GDP times 100. Remember that nominal GDP uses current year price level while real GDP uses base year prices, and GDP deflator compares these two values. So GDP deflator is an index, and in the base year, the index is equal to 100. Why? Suppose year 1 is the base year. In the base year, the current prices and the base year prices are the same. Therefore, nominal GDP and real GDP are equal. For example, nominal GDP for year 1 and real GDP for year 1, they're both 500 billion pounds. So the GDP deflator for year 1 is simply 500 divided by 500 times 100, so 100. An index of 100 does not mean that prices are 100 pounds. It simply provides a reference point. It tells us that prices are being measured relative to the base year. Well, suppose that in a later year, in year 2, nominal GDP has grown to 550 billion pounds, while real GDP remains constant at 500 billion pounds, and the GDP deflator is simply 550 divided by 500 times 100, so 110. So what does this index mean? It means that the average price level of domestically produced final output is 10% higher than that in base year. And the reasoning is GDP deflator of 100 means prices are at the base year level, while GDP deflator of 110 means prices are 10% higher than that in base year. Notice that real GDP is still at 500 billion pounds in this example, and this means that the quantity of output has not increased. The entire increase in nominal GDP from 500 to 550 is caused by higher prices. Now, imagine an extremely simple economy that only produces coffee. In the base year, in year 1, the economy produces 100 cups of coffee at £4 each. And the nominal GDP is therefore 100 cups times 4 pounds per cup. So 400 pounds in year 1 as the nominal GDP. Because this is the base year, the real GDP is also 400. And GDP deflator is therefore 100. 400 divided by 400 times 100. Now imagine that in the following year, the economy still produces 100 cups of coffee, but the price has risen to £5 per cup. Nominal GDP now becomes 100 times 5, so 500. However, real GDP remains 400. Because the base year price times the current year output equals 400 pounds. The GDP deflator in year 2 now becomes 500 divided by 400 times 100, so 125. So the index in between these 2 years has increased from 100 to 125, and this tells us that prices are 25% higher than in the base year. The economy is not producing more coffee. The money value of GDP has increased only because coffee has become more expensive. The nominal GDP has increased by 25% purely due to the fact that prices have increased by 25%. Now, what if both output and prices increase? Now, suppose that the economy produces 120 cups of coffee in year 2 at still five pounds each. The nominal GDP is 120 times 5, so 600 pounds as the nominal GDP for year 2. Well, the real GDP values the 120 cups using the base year price, 4 pounds per cup. So the real GDP for year 2 is 480 pounds, and the GDP deflator 600 divided by 480 times 100 is 125. The price index is still 125 because the current price is still 25% above the base year price. However, real GDP has increased from 400 to 480 because the economy now produces more coffee. And this allows us to separate the two changes. Nominal GDP increased because both output and prices increased. Real GDP increased because output increased, and GDP deflator increased purely because prices increased. This is the main purpose of the GDP deflator.